Pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you. Because after this video, you will never walk into a room the same way again. You will never sit in silence and feel weak. You will never open your mouth just to fill the void. Something is about to shift inside you, something cold, precise, and irreversible, and once it shifts, there is no going back. Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone walk into a room, a meeting, a dinner, a crowded gathering, and without saying a single word, every pair of eyes quietly drifted toward them? They did not announce themselves. They did not raise their voice. They did not perform. And yet somehow the temperature in the room changed the moment they crossed the threshold. People adjusted their posture. Conversations paused. Attention bent in their direction like light bending around a star. Now ask yourself, what did that person do? Nothing. And that is exactly the point. Most people believe that power is loud. That influence is earned by speaking the most, the fastest, the loudest. They believe charisma is a performance, a dazzling show of words, charm, and relentless energy. And because they believe this, they spend their entire lives talking themselves out of power. They fill every silence with nervous chatter. They over-explain. They laugh too quickly at jokes that are not funny. They nod too eagerly at opinions they do not share. They say yes when they mean no.
And they say something, anything, when the most strategic move would have been to say absolutely nothing. And here is the brutal truth most people will never accept. Every unnecessary word you speak is a withdrawal from your power account. Every time you rush to fill a silence, you hand a small piece of your authority to whoever is watching.
Every time you explain yourself when no explanation was asked for, you shrink. Not in height, not in physical space, but in the invisible architecture of dominance that governs every human interaction. You shrink in perception. And in the theater of power, perception is the only currency that matters. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this nearly 500 years ago. In his treatise on power, he did not write chapters about the art of eloquence. He did not tell princes to dazzle their courts with speeches. He told them something far more dangerous. He told them to be studied, to be watched, to be interpreted. He told them that the prince who reveals too much invites conspiracy, and the prince who says too little becomes a fortress no enemy can penetrate. Everyone sees what you appear to be, Machiavelli wrote. Few experience what you really are. Read that again. Let it settle into your bones. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. This is not a statement about deception. It is a statement about architecture. You are building something every single moment you exist in the presence of others. An image, a perception, an aura. And most people build carelessly. They throw open every door. They leave every window unguarded. They let anyone walk in and rearrange the furniture of their identity. And then they wonder why no one respects them. They wonder why their words have no weight. They wonder why they feel invisible, even when they are speaking. The answer is devastatingly simple. They gave it all away. They gave away the mystery. They gave away the tension. They gave away the gravitational pull that makes a human being magnetic. And what is left when you give all of that away? A person who talks too much, tries too hard, and controls nothing. This video is not about becoming quiet. Quiet is passive. Quiet is the person in the corner who says nothing because they have nothing to say. That is not power. That is absence. What I am going to teach you is something fundamentally different. I am going to teach you the art of strategic silence, the calculated, deliberate, weaponized use of non-speech to dominate rooms, shift dynamics, command respect, and build an aura so dense that people feel your presence before they see your face. This is the trick Machiavelli never wrote down explicitly, but it is embedded in every page of his work, like a cipher waiting for someone intelligent enough to decode it. The princes who lasted, the ones who held thrones for decades while others were overthrown in months, were not the ones who gave the best speeches. They were the ones who understood that silence, properly deployed, is the most sophisticated weapon in the human arsenal, and the reason this was never taught to you, not in school, not by your parents, not by any mentor or coach, is because the world profits from your noise. Society is built on a simple economic principle. The more you talk, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you become, the easier you are to control. Your employer wants you to speak so they can measure you. Your competitors want you to speak so they can map your strategy. Your enemies want you to speak so they can find your weaknesses. Silence terrifies them, and what terrifies others gives you power. Think about the last time you were in a negotiation. Formal or informal, it does not matter. Maybe it was a salary discussion. Maybe it was an argument with someone you love. Maybe it was a disagreement with a friend. Now, think about what you did. If you are like most people, you felt the pressure of silence and you rushed to fill it. You offered a compromise before one was needed. You explained your position 3 different ways. You softened your stance before the other person even pushed back. And in that moment, that exact moment when you opened your mouth to relieve the discomfort of quiet, you lost. You lost because the person who speaks first in a silence is the person who needs the interaction more. The person who fills the gap is the person who cannot tolerate the tension. And the person who cannot tolerate tension is the person who will always, inevitably, make concessions. Machiavelli called this the economy of revelation. I am paraphrasing, but the idea is precise. Every piece of information you reveal is a tile removed from the wall that protects you. Reveal enough tiles, and the wall collapses. Reveal nothing, and your opponent is left staring at a fortress they cannot breach. Now, I am not telling you to become a monk. I am not telling you to sit in rooms like a statue and never open your mouth. That would be foolish, and Machiavelli had no patience for fools. What I am telling you is something far more nuanced, far more surgical. I am telling you to become intentional about every syllable that leaves your lips. I am telling you to treat words the way a sniper treats bullets. Each one counted, each one aimed, each one fired only when the shot is guaranteed to land. Because here is what happens when you master this. You stop being a participant in conversations. You become the architect. You stop reacting to the room. The room starts reacting to you. You stop chasing attention. Attention chases you. And the dynamic shifts so completely that people will not even understand what changed. They will just feel it. They will feel your weight, your gravity, your presence. And that feeling, that inexplicable magnetism, is what separates the powerful from the forgotten. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine 2 people walk into a business meeting. Person A arrives and immediately starts talking. They greet everyone energetically. They make jokes. They comment on the weather, the traffic, the coffee. They fill every second with sound. They are likable. They are friendly. And by the time the meeting starts, everyone in the room knows exactly who Person A is. They have measured them, categorized them, filed them away. Person A is an open book, and open books are easy to put down. Now Person B walks in. They nod, maybe a brief handshake. They sit down. They say nothing. They observe. They listen. Their face reveals nothing. Not agreement, not disagreement, not boredom, not excitement. Just calm, steady attentiveness. And something strange begins to happen. The other people in the room start glancing at Person B. Not obviously, not consciously, but their eyes keep drifting back, checking, recalibrating, trying to read what cannot be read. When Person B finally speaks, and they will speak, but only when the moment is ripe, the room goes quiet. Not because they raised their voice, Not because they said something shocking, but because everyone has been waiting. The silence created anticipation. The restraint created weight. And the words, when they finally arrive, land like stones dropped into still water. Person A said 30 things. Nobody remembers any of them. Person B said 3 things. Nobody will forget them. This is not theory. This is not philosophy for its own sake. This is the raw mechanics of how power operates in every room, in every culture, in every era of human civilization. From the courts of Renaissance Italy to the boardrooms of modern corporations, the principle has never changed. The one who controls their tongue controls the room. Machiavelli observed this in the rulers he studied and advised. The effective prince was not the one who gave the most orders, but the one whose rare orders carried the most weight. The effective prince did not explain his reasoning. He let his actions speak, and his silence breed speculation. Because speculation, in the hands of the powerful, is a tool. When people do not know what you are thinking, they project their fears onto you. And a person surrounded by the fears of others is a person who is automatically elevated. You do not need to be feared. You need to be unreadable. There is a profound difference between these two things, and most people confuse them. Fear is a blunt instrument. It works in the short term, but it breeds resentment, rebellion, and eventually overthrow. History is littered with rulers who were feared and destroyed. But unreadability, the quality of being someone others cannot predict, cannot categorize, cannot reduce to a simple label, that is the sharpest blade in existence. Because you cannot defeat what you do not understand. You cannot manipulate what you cannot map. You cannot outmaneuver an opponent whose next move is invisible to you. And silence is the cloak that makes you invisible. Think about the people in your life who intimidate you, not through aggression, not through threats, but through sheer presence. The boss who listens to your entire pitch and then says nothing for 10 seconds before responding. The friend who, when you ask for their opinion, pauses just long enough to make you doubt your own position before they even open their mouth. The stranger at a party who stands at the edge of the crowd, drink in hand, watching everything and saying nothing, and somehow commands more attention than the loudest person in the room. These people have all discovered the same secret, whether consciously or by instinct. Human beings are hardwired to pay attention to what they cannot decode. Our brains are pattern recognition machines. We crave predictability. We crave certainty. We crave resolution. And when someone denies us that, when someone sits in our presence and refuses to be decoded, our brains lock onto them like a missile locks onto a heat signature. You become the most interesting thing in the room, not by trying, by withholding. This is the fundamental paradox of human attention. We are drawn not to what is given freely, but to what is held back. The person who tells you everything about themselves in the first 5 minutes is forgettable. The person who reveals almost nothing is unforgettable. The person who explains their every thought is predictable. The person who lets their thoughts remain hidden is magnetic. And this is where Machiavelli's wisdom becomes dangerous. Because once you understand this principle, truly understand it, in your marrow, in your nervous system, not just in your intellect, you gain access to a level of social influence that most people do not even know exists. You gain the ability to control a room without raising your voice, to win negotiations without making threats, to earn respect without begging for it, to become the most powerful person in any interaction simply by mastering the art of what you do not say. But here is the warning, and I will not soften it. This is not easy. It is not a hack. It is not a trick you learn in an afternoon and deploy tomorrow. It is a complete rewiring of how you interact with the world, because everything inside you, every instinct, every social conditioning, every fear of judgment will scream at you to speak, to fill, to explain, to justify, to perform, And you will have to learn, slowly and painfully, to let that scream die unanswered. You will have to learn to sit in the fire of silence and not flinch. You will have to learn to be comfortable being watched without knowing what others think of you. You will have to learn to let pauses stretch until they become almost unbearable, and then hold them a beat longer. And when you master this, when silence becomes not an absence, but a weapon in your hands, you will understand why Machiavelli built his entire philosophy on the principle that appearance is more powerful than reality. Because your silence does not just change how others see you, it changes the reality of what you are. You become denser, more focused, more deliberate. The noise inside your own mind quiets, and what replaces it is clarity. The cold, sharp, luminous clarity of a person who thinks before they act, who observes before they respond, who moves only when the movement will create maximum impact. That is the person you are about to become. And if you have made it this far, if something in these words has resonated with a part of you that you have been ignoring, a part that always knew you were giving too much away, talking too much, revealing too much, performing too much, then stay with me. Because what comes next will arm you with the specific tools, the exact techniques, the precise mechanics of how to deploy silence as the most devastating instrument in your arsenal. This is not the end. This is the first breath of a transformation that will alter every relationship, every negotiation, every interaction you have from this moment forward. The room you walk into tomorrow will not know what hit it, but you will. You will know exactly what you did. And more importantly, you will know exactly what you chose not to do. Stay with me. The real strategy is about to unfold. Now that you understand the foundation, now that you see silence not as emptiness, but as architecture, it is time to go deeper. Because knowing that silence is powerful is not enough. A blade sitting on a table is just metal. A blade in the hands of someone who knows exactly where to cut, that is a weapon. And what I am about to give you are the precise edges of this weapon. The specific traits, the exact characteristics, the detailed anatomy of someone who controls any room without uttering a word. Machiavelli studied men who held power and men who lost it. He dissected their habits, their rituals, their patterns of behavior. And what he found again and again was that the rulers who endured were not the ones with the largest armies or the most gold. They were the ones who understood the invisible war. The war fought not on battlefields, but in perceptions, in impressions, in the subtle theater of human judgment. And in that theater, silence was the greatest set piece. Let me break this down into 5 pillars. 5 traits that define the person who commands a room without speaking. Master these, and you will not need to convince anyone of your power. They will feel it in their spine the moment you enter their field of vision. The first pillar, the economy of words. This is the foundation of everything. And it is deceptively simple, which is exactly why almost no one masters it. The economy of words means this: you treat every sentence that leaves your mouth as a transaction. Every word has a cost. Every statement is an investment. And like any intelligent investor, you never spend more than you need to. Most people are verbal spendthrifts. They throw words around like confetti, abundant, colorful, and ultimately worthless. They repeat themselves. They overqualify their statements. They pad their sentences with filler phrases that add nothing but reveal everything. I think maybe it's just my opinion, but I don't know if this is right, but sorry, can I just say something? Each of these phrases is a signal, and the signal is, I am uncertain. I am seeking permission. I do not trust my own voice. Now compare that to the person who speaks with economy. They say what needs to be said and nothing more. When asked a question, they answer it, cleanly, directly, without apology or qualification. When they have nothing to add, they add nothing. They do not feel the need to contribute to every conversation, every debate, every discussion. They choose their moments the way a hawk chooses its descent, with precision, with patience, and with devastating accuracy. Machiavelli wrote about this in his analysis of Cesare Borgia, a prince he both admired and studied with surgical fascination. Borgia did not explain his decisions to his subordinates. He did not justify his strategies to his allies. He acted, and he let the action speak. When he spoke, it was to issue commands that had clearly been considered for days, weeks, or months before they were voiced. And because his words were rare, they carried the weight of iron. No one dismissed what Borgia said. No one half listened. When he opened his mouth, the room crystallized. You can cultivate this same quality, not by mimicking a Renaissance warlord, but by adopting the principle underneath. Make your words scarce enough to be valuable. Speak less, and every syllable becomes gold. Speak constantly, and your words become background noise, present but ignored, like the hum of an air conditioner. Here is a practical test. The next time you are in a group conversation, count how many times you speak purely out of social obligation. Not because you have something meaningful to contribute, but because the silence felt uncomfortable, because you wanted to be seen as engaged, because you feared being perceived as aloof. Count those moments. And then the next time, let half of them pass in silence. Just let them go. Do not fill them. Do not perform. Simply observe, and watch what happens to the room around you. The second pillar, the mastery of the pause. If economy of words is the strategy, the pause is the tactic. The pause is the space between stimulus and response, and it is in that space that power lives. Most people respond immediately. Someone asks them a question, and the answer leaps from their mouth before their brain has finished processing. Someone insults them, and the retort flies out like a reflex. Someone makes a request, and the yes or no arrives before the implications have been considered. This is not conversational skill, this is reactive behavior. It is the social equivalent of flinching, an involuntary response that signals a lack of control. The person who pauses, who receives a question, holds it for 2 or 3 seconds, and then responds, communicates something entirely different. They communicate deliberation. They communicate that their answer is not a reflex, but a choice. They communicate that they are in control of the tempo of the interaction, and that tempo will move at their speed, not anyone else's. Machiavelli understood tempo. He wrote about the importance of timing in political action, of knowing when to strike and when to wait, when to advance and when to hold. The same principle applies to conversation. The person who controls the pace of a dialogue controls the dialogue itself. And the simplest way to control pace is to introduce pauses that others do not expect. Imagine this scenario. You are in a meeting. Someone presents an idea and then turns to you, expecting immediate feedback. Instead of rushing to respond, you hold their gaze for 2 full seconds. You let the silence sit. And then, calmly, evenly, you deliver your response. The content of your response almost does not matter. What matters is the pause. Because that pause told everyone in the room 3 things. First, that you are not reactive. Second, that you consider your words before you release them. Third, and this is the most powerful, that you are comfortable in the tension that silence creates. And comfort in tension is one of the most universally recognized signals of dominance in human social dynamics. Animals do this instinctively. The alpha predator does not flinch at sudden noises. It does not startle. It does not rush. It moves with a measured cadence that communicates total control over its environment. Humans are no different. We instinctively read composure as strength and reactivity as weakness. The pause is how you demonstrate composure in the arena of conversation. Practice this deliberately. When someone asks you a question, count silently to 2 before answering. When someone makes a provocative statement, let it hang in the air for 3 full seconds before you respond, or choose not to respond at all. When you feel the urge to fill a silence, recognize the urge for what it is, a reflex conditioned by insecurity, and let it pass. Over time, the pause will stop being a technique and start being a part of who you are. It will become your natural rhythm, and that rhythm will set the tempo for every room you walk into. The third pillar, the language of the body. Words are only a fraction of communication. You know this intellectually, but most people forget it in practice. They obsess over what to say while completely ignoring how their body speaks on their behalf, often saying things they would never consciously choose to communicate. The person who controls a room without speaking understands that their body is constantly broadcasting a signal. Their posture, their eye contact, their rate of movement, their facial expressions, the position of their hands, every element is a transmission, and it is being received and decoded by every brain in the room, whether those brains are aware of it or not. Here is what weak body language looks like. Constant fidgeting, touching the face, adjusting clothing, shifting weight from foot to foot. Rapid head movements, darting eyes, a tendency to look away when someone holds eye contact. Closed postures, crossed arms, hunched shoulders, collapsed chest, rushed gestures, nervous laughter, excessive nodding. Each of these signals screams the same thing. I am uncomfortable. I am uncertain. I do not feel safe here. And here is what powerful body language looks like. Stillness, measured, deliberate movements. A posture that occupies space without aggression. Open chest, relaxed shoulders, weight evenly distributed, feet planted. Eye contact that is steady and calm, neither aggressive nor evasive. Minimal gesturing. When the hands move, they move with purpose. A face that reveals engagement, but not eagerness, attention, but not anxiety. Machiavelli wrote about the importance of appearances, of crafting an image that serves your strategic goals. A prince, he argued, must learn to be a great pretender and dissembler. But this is not about pretending. This is about aligning your external presentation with the internal state you are cultivating. When you master stillness in your body, something remarkable happens. Your mind follows. The physical act of being calm produces actual calm. The physical act of taking up space produces actual confidence. The body does not just express your inner state, it shapes it. This is why the person who controls their body controls far more than the perceptions of others. They control their own psychology. They anchor themselves in a state of composed authority that is not a performance, but a reality. And others can sense the difference between performed confidence and real confidence. Performed confidence is brittle. It cracks under pressure. It fluctuates with circumstance. It needs constant maintenance. Real confidence, the kind that emerges from physical mastery and internal stillness, is granite. It does not waver. It does not need to be defended. It simply exists, and its existence is enough. So here is what you do. Start with awareness. For 1 full week, pay attention to your body in social situations. Notice when you fidget. Notice when you look away from eye contact. Notice when you hunch, when you cross your arms, when you shift your weight nervously. Do not judge these habits. Just observe them. Map them. Know them. Then, one by one, begin to replace them. Stand still instead of shifting. Hold eye contact for 1 additional second before looking away. Uncross your arms. Open your posture. Move more slowly. Take up slightly more space. Not aggressively, not dominantly, but deliberately. As if every movement you make has been considered and chosen. And watch the reactions change. Watch how people start paying more attention to you. Watch how conversations shift when you enter them. Watch how your own internal state begins to transform as your body teaches your mind what real composure feels like. The fourth pillar, the power of selective absence. Machiavelli understood something that most people never grasp. Presence is powerful, but absence, strategic, deliberate, calculated absence, is devastating. The person who is always available is never valued. The person who is always present is never missed. The person who responds to every message immediately, attends every gathering, accepts every invitation, and fills every moment with interaction becomes wallpaper. They are part of the scenery, comfortable, familiar, and completely without impact. But the person who appears selectively, who is present when it matters and absent when it does not, creates something that no amount of constant availability can produce: scarcity. And scarcity, in the economics of human attention, is the single most powerful driver of perceived value. Think about this in terms of your own experience. Who do you think about more? The friend who is always around, always texting, always reachable? Or the friend who surfaces occasionally, unpredictably, and whose presence feels like an event rather than a routine? The answer is obvious. The scarce friend occupies more of your mental real estate, not because they are better, but because their absence creates a void, and your brain, which abhors a void as nature abhors a vacuum, fills that space with attention, curiosity, and value. This is not about playing games. This is about understanding a fundamental law of human psychology and using it with precision. Machiavelli advised princes to make their appearances occasions, not routines. When the prince appeared before his people, it was a spectacle, a moment, an event. It carried weight precisely because it was rare. And when the prince withdrew, his absence generated speculation, conversation, and a longing for return that reinforced his significance. You can apply this in every domain of your life. In professional settings, stop being the person who attends every optional meeting, who responds to every email within seconds, who is always the first to volunteer and the last to leave. Instead, choose your engagements with ruthless selectivity. Attend the meetings that matter. Respond to the messages that deserve your attention. Volunteer only when the opportunity aligns with your strategic interests, and let everything else pass. In social settings, stop being the person who says yes to every invitation. Instead, be the person whose attendance transforms an ordinary gathering into a significant one. When you decline invitations graciously but regularly, something interesting happens. The invitations do not stop. They increase. And they come with more urgency. Because scarcity breeds desire, and desire breeds pursuit. In personal relationships, stop being the person who is always emotionally available, always ready to process, always eager to connect. This does not mean becoming cold or withholding love. It means having a life rich enough and a sense of self strong enough that your presence is a gift, not a given. The person who has their own world, their own projects, their own solitude, their own inner fortress, is infinitely more attractive than the person whose entire emotional economy depends on the presence of others. Machiavelli called this the art of withdrawal. I call it the power of strategic absence. And it is one of the most counterintuitive but effective tools in the entire arsenal of silent dominance. The fifth pillar, the gaze that commands. This is the subtlest of the 5 pillars, and in many ways, the most powerful. Because the gaze, the quality of how you look at people and at the world, communicates more in a single glance than most people communicate in an hour of conversation. There is a specific quality to the gaze of a person who holds power. It is not aggressive. It is not staring. It is not the wide-eyed intensity of someone trying to intimidate. It is something far more refined than that. It is a gaze that is calm, steady, and evaluative. A gaze that says, I see you. I am measuring you. And I am in no hurry to reveal my conclusions. This gaze is unsettling to most people because it reverses the typical power dynamic of eye contact. In most interactions, people break eye contact downward when they feel subordinate and maintain it when they feel confident. The person with a commanding gaze does neither of these things reflexively. They hold eye contact not as a challenge, but as a statement of presence. They look at you the way a chess master looks at a board, with total attention, total calm, and the quiet certainty that they see patterns you do not. Machiavelli described this quality in the leaders he most admired: the ability to observe without being observed, to study without being studied, to see through the masks that others wear while keeping one's own mask firmly in place. This is not deception. It is perception. It is the cultivated ability to read a room, to read a person, to read a situation with clarity that others lack because they are too busy performing to observe. Here is how you begin to develop this. When you are in conversation, resist the urge to look away every few seconds. Instead, settle your gaze on the person speaking, not with intensity, not with aggression, but with calm, unhurried attention. Let your face be neutral, not cold, but composed. Let your eyes communicate interest without desperation, engagement without eagerness. When someone finishes speaking and the group turns to you for a response, hold eye contact with the speaker for a moment longer than expected before you reply. That fraction of a second, that tiny extension of the gaze, communicates more authority than any words you could offer. In groups, practice observing more than participating. Let your eyes move slowly across the room, taking in the dynamics, the alliances, the tensions. Do not rush to engage. Let people come to you. And when they do, receive them with that same steady, evaluative gaze that says, "I was watching. I know more than you think." This is the gaze of the sovereign, not the sovereign who demands obedience, but the sovereign who earns it, through the quiet, unshakable certainty that they see the world more clearly than the people around them. And when you cultivate this gaze, something extraordinary happens. People begin to believe it. They begin to treat you as someone who sees more, knows more, understands more. Not because you told them so, but because your eyes told them so without your mouth ever opening. Now, let me show you how these 5 pillars work together, because individually, each one is powerful. But combined, they create something greater than the sum of their parts. They create an aura, a field of influence that surrounds you like a gravitational pull, drawing people in while keeping them at exactly the distance you choose. Imagine you walk into a networking event. You arrive, and you do not rush to introduce yourself to anyone. You find a position in the room where you can observe. You stand with open, relaxed posture, feet planted, shoulders back, hands still. You hold a drink, but you do not fidget with it. Your face is calm, your breathing is steady, and your eyes are slowly scanning the room, taking in the landscape of personalities and dynamics. People begin to notice you. Not because you are doing anything, because you are not doing anything while everyone else is performing. You are the stillness in a room full of motion, and stillness in motion draws the eye the way a rock in a river draws the current. Someone approaches you. They introduce themselves. Instead of immediately launching into your own introduction with enthusiasm and energy, you pause. You hold their eye contact for a moment. You offer a slight nod. And then, calmly, you say your name. Nothing more. No explanation of what you do, where you are from, or why you are there. Just your name, offered like a single card placed on a table, precise, controlled, and insufficient to satisfy their curiosity. And that insufficiency is the point, because now they are the ones doing the work. They are asking questions, they are leaning in, they are trying to decode you. And every moment they spend trying is a moment in which you are the center of their attention, the object of their focus, the gravity well around which their social energy orbits. You answer their questions, but with economy. Short, clear responses that give just enough to maintain the conversation, but never enough to complete the picture. You ask them questions, not rapid fire, not interrogative, but deliberate, thoughtful questions that show you are paying attention to what they say. And when you ask, you listen, not with performative nodding and exaggerated agreement, but with genuine, quiet attention. The kind of attention that makes people feel simultaneously seen and studied. By the time you leave that interaction, you have spoken less than almost anyone else at the event. And yet, you are the person that individual will remember. You are the person they will mention to others. You are the person who created an impression not through effort, but through restraint. This is the synthesis of the 5 pillars: economy of words, mastery of the pause, command of the body, strategic absence, the sovereign gaze. Together, they form a complete system, a way of being in the world that does not demand attention but magnetically attracts it, that does not chase respect but inevitably earns it, that does not perform power but radiates it from a center so still and so certain that the performance becomes unnecessary. Machiavelli spent his life studying the mechanics of power. He watched princes rise and fall. He saw empires built and crumbled. And the thread that ran through every lasting dynasty, every enduring leader, every figure who left an imprint on history, was this. They understood that true power does not announce itself. It does not need to. True power is felt before it is seen, recognized before it is declared, and obeyed before it is demanded. And now you have the blueprint. But a blueprint is not a building. Knowing the 5 pillars is not the same as living them. And that is exactly what we are going to address next. The precise, practical, step-by-step application of these principles in the situations you face every day. The meetings, the conflicts, the negotiations, the moments where silence could save you or speech could destroy you. The coldest move is still to come. And if you have been paying attention, you already feel it forming inside you. That quiet resolve, that deliberate calm, that refusal to waste a single word on anything that does not serve your assent. Hold that feeling. It is about to become your most dangerous asset. Now we cross the threshold from understanding to execution. Everything you have absorbed until this moment, the philosophy, the pillars, the architecture of silent power, means nothing if it stays in your mind. Knowledge that does not become action is decoration, and you are not here for decoration. You are here for transformation. So let me arm you. Let me hand you the exact tactics, the precise scripts, the specific moves that will allow you to deploy silence as a surgical instrument in the situations that define your daily life. No vague philosophy, no abstract principles, concrete, immediate, deployable strategy. Machiavelli despised the theorist who could not act. He admired the prince who turned insight into movement, who converted understanding into advantage. It is not titles that honor men, he wrote, but men that honor titles. The same applies here. It is not knowledge that creates power, but the person who converts knowledge into behavior. And behavior is what we are about to engineer. The loaded silence in negotiation. This is perhaps the single most powerful move you will ever learn in any negotiation, professional, personal, romantic, or otherwise. And it is devastatingly simple. When someone makes you an offer, a proposal, or a request, do not respond, not immediately, not for several seconds. Simply look at them. Hold their gaze with calm, neutral composure. And wait. What happens next will reveal everything you need to know. In most cases, the other person will begin to crumble. Not visibly, not dramatically, but internally. The silence you create generates a pressure that most people cannot withstand. It activates a primal social anxiety, the fear that they have overstepped, that their offer was inadequate, that they are being judged and found wanting. And in their desperation to relieve that pressure, they will do your work for you. They will revise their own offer before you have said a single word. They will add concessions you never asked for. They will soften their position, sweeten the terms, bend in your direction, all because you had the discipline to let silence do the negotiating. Let me give you the exact choreography. Your colleague proposes a project timeline that you find unreasonable. Instead of immediately pushing back, instead of saying, "That's too tight," or "I don't think that works," or "Can we discuss alternatives?" you do this. You lean back slightly. You hold their eye contact. You let your face settle into neutral composure, not a frown, not a smile, just calm attentiveness. And you wait. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, 4, 5. 5 seconds of silence after a proposal feels like an eternity to the person who made it. And in that eternity, their confidence erodes. They start to read your silence as dissatisfaction. They start to feel the inadequacy of their own offer. And then, almost inevitably, they begin to amend it. Of course, we could be flexible on the deadline. I mean, that's just an initial thought. We could look at pushing it back a week or two. You have not said a word. You have not objected. You have not counter-proposed. And yet, the negotiation has already moved in your direction. All because you mastered the most difficult skill in human interaction, the ability to resist the urge to respond. Now, here is the critical nuance. The loaded silence is not a blank stare. It is not hostility. It is not a power play that broadcasts its own intention. If the other person perceives your silence as a deliberate manipulation tactic, it loses all its effectiveness. The silence must feel natural. It must feel like the silence of someone who is genuinely considering, genuinely evaluating, genuinely processing. The difference between manipulative silence and strategic silence is sincerity. You are not pretending to think. You are actually thinking. You are using those 5 seconds to evaluate the proposal with genuine consideration. The strategy is not in faking deliberation. It is in refusing to skip it. Most people skip deliberation because they are afraid of silence. You do not skip it because you have trained yourself to live inside silence comfortably. And that comfort, that ease in the pause, is what makes the tactic invisible and therefore devastating. Here is another scenario. You are in a salary negotiation. Your employer names a figure. The figure is lower than what you wanted. The instinct of most people is to immediately counter with their own number, to justify their worth, to launch into a rehearsed speech about their accomplishments and value. And in doing so, they reveal their anxiety. They reveal their eagerness. They reveal that they need this negotiation to resolve quickly because the tension is unbearable. Instead, you receive the number. You nod once, slowly, as if you are writing the figure on a mental chalkboard, and then you say nothing. You let the number sit in the room like an object on a table between you, and you watch. 9 times out of 10, the employer will begin to feel the weight of that number in the silence you have created. They will start to qualify it. Of course, there's room for discussion. We could revisit this in 6 months. There might be flexibility with the benefits package. Each qualification is a concession you earned without opening your mouth. Each one is a brick added to the foundation of your negotiating position, not by your effort, but by their discomfort. This is what Machiavelli meant when he talked about letting others defeat themselves. The most efficient victory is the one your opponent hands to you because they could not endure the stillness of a battlefield where no one was firing. The controlled response to provocation. This is where silence becomes armor. Because there will be moments, many of them, when people try to provoke you, when they insult you, dismiss you, challenge you, or attack you in ways designed to trigger an emotional reaction. And your reaction, or lack of one, will determine who holds the power in that exchange. Here is what most people do when provoked. They react. They defend themselves. They argue. They raise their voice. They match the energy of the attack with the energy of a counterattack. And in doing so, they hand their power to the provocateur on a silver platter. Because the person who can make you react is the person who controls you. If someone can reliably trigger your anger, your defensiveness, your need to justify yourself, they own you. They hold the strings, and you are the puppet who dances every time they pull. The person who masters silence does not dance. Here is the scenario. Someone in a meeting dismisses your idea publicly. They say something cutting, something designed to diminish you in front of others. That's not really a serious suggestion, is it? Or perhaps something more subtle. A smirk, a raised eyebrow, a condescending tone. The weak response is to defend the idea immediately, passionately, desperately, to justify, explain, counter-argue. This is what they expect. This is what they want, because a defensive response confirms the power of their attack. It tells the room, their words got to me. Their opinion matters enough to shake me. I am affected. The strategic response is this. You receive the dismissal. You let it land. You hold the speaker's gaze with that calm, evaluative look you have been cultivating. And then, after a pause long enough to let every person in the room feel the weight of the moment, you do one of two things. Option 1. You say nothing. You redirect your attention to someone else in the room, as if the provocateur's comment was so insignificant that it did not warrant acknowledgement. You simply continue the conversation as though they had not spoken. This is nuclear, because being ignored is more devastating to the ego than being argued with. An argument grants significance. Silence denies it entirely. Option 2. You respond with a single, short, devastating sentence. Not a defense. Not a justification. A reframe. Something like, "That's an interesting perspective." Then silence. Or, "I appreciate you sharing that." Then silence. The brevity is the weapon. The fact that you did not engage with the substance of the attack communicates that the attack is beneath you. You acknowledged it the way a king acknowledges a peasant's complaint, with courtesy so thin it becomes contempt. Either option achieves the same result. The provocateur loses. They fired a shot designed to destabilize you, and you absorbed it without flinching. The room saw everything. The room noted everything. And the room adjusted its assessment of both of you in that instant. You became more formidable. They became less so. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the danger of being baited into emotional responses. He observed that the prince who reacts to every insult, every slight, every challenge to his authority, diminishes that authority with each reaction. The truly powerful prince is the one who receives attacks the way a mountain receives rain, unmoved, unchanged, quietly eroding the force that dares to strike against it. The art of the question. That ends. Conversations. Most people use questions to gather information. The strategist uses questions to redirect power. And one specific type of question is so potent that it can end conflicts, derail manipulations, and reclaim control of any conversation in a single stroke. It is the reflective question, and it works like this. Someone is pressuring you to make a decision quickly. They are pushing, insisting, creating urgency. All classic manipulation tactics designed to prevent you from thinking clearly. Instead of resisting directly, instead of saying, "I need more time," or "Stop pressuring me," both of which position you as the weaker party, you ask a single, calm question. What makes you feel this needs to be decided right now? And then silence. This question is a masterpiece of strategic communication for 3 reasons. First, it reverses the dynamic. The person who was attacking is now defending. They have to justify their urgency, which forces them to examine it. And urgency, when examined, often collapses. Second, it reveals their motives without you having to accuse them of anything. If their urgency is manufactured, the question exposes it. If their urgency is genuine, the question brings the real reason to the surface, which gives you actual information to work with. Third, it communicates that you are not someone who can be rushed, that you make decisions on your timeline, not theirs. And that communication alone shifts the balance of the entire exchange. Here are more reflective questions for different situations. When someone gives you unsolicited advice designed to undermine your confidence, what makes you say that? Not aggressive, not defensive, just a calm, curious inquiry that forces them to justify an opinion they expected you to simply absorb. When someone tries to guilt you into doing something, what would you do in my position? This redirects the emotional weight back onto them. It forces them to engage with your perspective, which they were hoping to bypass entirely. When someone makes a vague accusation or passive-aggressive remark, can you be more specific about what you mean? This is devastating because passive aggression depends on vagueness. It depends on implication rather than statement. When you demand specificity, you strip the weapon of its camouflage. And most passive-aggressive people will retreat rather than make their aggression explicit. Each of these questions follows the same pattern. Brief, calm, directed, followed by silence. The question does the work. The silence amplifies it, and the combination creates a conversational dynamic where you are always the one directing and never the one defending. The ritual of deliberate entry. How you enter a room is not a detail, it is a declaration. And most people make that declaration carelessly, rushing in with hurried steps, scattered energy, apologetic body language, and the unmistakable air of someone who is reacting to the room rather than shaping it. The person who controls a room understands that the first 30 seconds after they cross the threshold are the most important. Because in those 30 seconds, every brain in the room runs a rapid, unconscious assessment. They evaluate your posture, your pace, your eye contact, your energy, and they form a judgment that will color every subsequent interaction. That judgment is not fair. It is not rational. But it is real, and it is almost impossible to reverse once formed. So here is your ritual. Before you enter any room, a meeting, a party, a dinner, an interview, you pause at the threshold, not visibly, not dramatically, but internally you take one breath, you settle your body, you lower your shoulders, you straighten your spine, you set your face to neutral composure, and then you walk in at a pace that is slightly, just slightly, slower than the pace of everyone else. This slower pace is crucial. Speed communicates urgency, and urgency communicates subordination. The person who rushes is the person who is afraid of being late, afraid of missing something, afraid of being judged for their timing. The person who moves slowly communicates the opposite. I am not governed by the clock. I am not afraid of this room. I arrive when I choose to arrive, and the room adjusts to me. Once inside, you do not immediately seek out someone to talk to. You do not beeline for a familiar face. You take a moment, 2 or 3 seconds, to survey the space. Your eyes move across the room with calm deliberation. You are not scanning nervously. You are assessing the way a general assesses a field before deploying forces, and then, only then, do you move toward your chosen position. This ritual takes perhaps 10 seconds, but in those 10 seconds, you have communicated more about your character, your confidence, and your self-possession than most people communicate in an hour of conversation. The strategic non-answer. There are moments when the most powerful response to a question is not an answer at all, not a refusal to answer that communicates defensiveness, but a response that acknowledges the question while refusing to be contained by it. This is an advanced tactic, and it requires precision. Used clumsily, it seems evasive. Used skillfully, it is devastating. Someone asks you a question designed to pin you down. So, do you agree with what they said? Are you planning to stay at this company long term? So, what do you really think about the new strategy? Each of these questions is a trap, not necessarily a hostile trap, but a trap nonetheless. Because any direct answer reduces you, it categorizes you. It gives the questioner a label they can attach to you and use to predict your behavior. The strategic non-answer resists this categorization without appearing evasive. Here is how it sounds. Do you agree with what they said? I think there are elements worth considering from multiple perspectives. Are you planning to stay long-term? I'm focused on making the most impact where I am right now. What do you really think about the new strategy? I think the real question is whether the execution matches the ambition. Each of these responses accomplishes the same thing. It answers without answering. It provides words without providing information. It satisfies the social requirement of responding while preserving the strategic advantage of remaining unreadable. And each one subtly redirects the conversation away from your position and toward a larger framework that you control. Machiavelli would have called this the art of the veil, the ability to stand in plain sight while remaining hidden, to speak while revealing nothing, to engage while preserving the mystery that makes you formidable. The mistakes that destroy everything. Now, I must warn you, because every powerful tool can be misused, and every strategy has its pitfalls. There are mistakes, common, predictable, devastating mistakes that will turn these tactics against you if you are not careful. The first mistake is overuse. If you are silent all the time, you are not strategic. You are absent. If you pause before every response, you are not deliberate. You are slow. If you refuse to answer every question, you are not mysterious. You are frustrating. The power of these tactics lies in their selectivity. They work because they are unexpected. They create impact because they break the pattern. If silence becomes your only mode, it ceases to be a weapon and becomes a wall, and walls do not command rooms. They divide them. The second mistake is performing silence instead of inhabiting it. If your pauses feel rehearsed, if your stillness feels forced, if your gaze feels like a tactic rather than a natural expression of composure, people will sense it. And the moment they sense performance, the spell breaks. You go from being intriguing to being manipulative, from being powerful to being awkward, from being mysterious to being theatrical. The goal is not to act like a person of silent authority. The goal is to become one. And that transformation requires genuine internal work. Genuine stillness, genuine confidence, genuine comfort with who you are when you are not performing. The third mistake is using silence as cruelty. There is a line between strategic restraint and emotional manipulation, and that line matters. Withholding words to maintain power in a negotiation is strategy. Withholding words to punish a partner, a friend, or a loved one. Giving the silent treatment, refusing to communicate, using absence as a weapon against someone who cares about you, is not power. It is cowardice, disguised as strength. Machiavelli wrote about the necessity of being both feared and loved. And he warned that the prince who relies entirely on fear, who uses his tools to harm rather than to lead, inevitably falls. The same applies here. Use silence to elevate yourself. Never use it to diminish others. The fourth mistake is ignoring context. Silence is not equally powerful in all situations. In some cultures, in some relationships, in some professional contexts, excessive silence is read not as confidence, but as disengagement, hostility, or incompetence. The intelligent practitioner reads the room before deploying any tactic. They understand the norms, the expectations, the specific dynamics of the environment they are in, and they calibrate their silence accordingly. A courtroom demands different behavior than a casual dinner. A first date demands different behavior than a board meeting. The principle remains constant. The application must be fluid. The fifth mistake is thinking this replaces substance. Silence is a multiplier, not a substitute. If you have nothing of value behind the silence, no competence, no knowledge, no genuine capability, then your silence is not a fortress. It is an empty room. Eventually, someone will call your bluff. Eventually, someone will ask the question your silence cannot answer. And in that moment, if there is nothing behind the mask shatters permanently. The most powerful silence is the silence of someone who could fill the room with brilliance, but chooses not to. That choice, that restraint in the presence of capability, is what creates real gravity. So master the substance first. Build genuine skill in your domain. Develop real knowledge, real competence, real value. And then, only then, deploy silence as the amplifier that makes your substance resonate at a frequency that commands attention. Machiavelli never admired the fool who kept quiet because he had nothing to say. He admired the genius who kept quiet because he understood that saying less made everything he said land with the force of a verdict. That is the difference. And it is a difference you must embody completely. If you have been paying attention, truly paying attention, not just hearing but absorbing, something has already begun to shift inside you. You can feel it, cannot you? A quiet hardening, a subtle reorganization of how you think about yourself in relation to the world. You are already beginning to see conversations differently. You are already beginning to notice the moments where you would have spoken, but now realize silence would have been sharper. That is the transformation beginning. Not as a dramatic event, but as a gradual crystallization, like ice forming on water, slowly, invisibly, and then suddenly undeniable. Hold it, let it continue, because the final stage of this transformation is about to begin, and it is in that final stage that everything comes together, where the philosophy, the pillars, the tactics, and the warnings merge into something that is no longer a strategy, but an identity. A new way of existing in the world, a way that does not chase power, but becomes the place where power gathers. Stay with me. We are entering the final chamber. You have walked a long road to reach this moment, and if you are still here, if you have not looked away, if you have not skipped ahead, if you have sat with every word and let each one carve its mark into you, then you are already different from who you were when this video began. Not because I changed you, because you chose to stay in the fire long enough to be forged. Most people will never make it this far, not because the content is too difficult, but because the content demands something most people are unwilling to give. The willingness to look honestly at how they have been living and admit that it was not working. The willingness to acknowledge that the noise, the constant talking, the relentless performing, the desperate need to be seen and heard and validated, all of it was not strength. It was a symptom of something they were afraid to face. The void. That quiet, still, terrifying void that exists inside every person who has never learned to be comfortable with themselves in silence. The void that whispers, if you stop talking, they will forget you. If you stop performing, they will leave. If you stop filling the air with your presence, you will dissolve into nothing. And so they talk and talk and talk. Not because they have something to say, but because the silence feels like death. But you have learned something different now. You have learned that the void is not death. The void is the birthplace of power. The void is where clarity lives, where strategy is born, where the self becomes dense enough to generate its own gravity. The void is not something to fear. It is something to inhabit, to furnish, to make your home. And that is the metamorphosis I am about to describe. Not a change in behavior, you already have the tactics for that, but a change in identity, a fundamental reorganization of who you are at the deepest level of your being. Because tactics without identity are temporary. You can force yourself to pause before responding for a week, maybe 2. You can consciously slow your pace and control your body language for a month. But unless the person underneath those behaviors transforms, unless the core of you shifts from someone who fears silence to someone who draws strength from it, you will eventually revert. The old patterns will creep back, the noise will return, the performing will resume. Machiavelli understood this. He wrote not just about the tactics of princes, but about their nature. He knew that a prince who merely pretended to be ruthless would eventually be exposed. The pretense would crack under pressure, and the weakness beneath would be revealed for all to see. But the prince whose ruthlessness was genuine, not performed but intrinsic, not worn like a costume but woven into the fabric of his character, that prince was unbreakable. Because you cannot strip away what is not a mask but a face. So let me tell you who you are becoming. Not who you are pretending to be, who you are actually becoming, if you allow this transformation to complete itself. You are becoming the person who does not need the room to acknowledge them in order to feel real. Most people derive their sense of self from external validation, from the reactions of others, from the attention they receive, from the approval they harvest through performance. Remove the audience, and they collapse. Remove the validation, and they panic. They are thermometers. They reflect the temperature of their environment. When the room is warm toward them, they feel warm. When the room is cold, they shatter. You are becoming a thermostat. You set the temperature. You determine the climate. The room adjusts to you, not the other way around. And this is not arrogance. This is sovereignty. The sovereignty of a person who has located their center of gravity inside themselves, rather than in the hands of others. Think about what this means practically. It means walking into a room full of strangers and feeling no anxiety. Not because you are pretending to be confident, but because your sense of self does not depend on whether those strangers like you, notice you, or approve of you. Their opinions are data, not verdicts. Their reactions are information, not identity. You receive them, you process them, and you move forward, adjusted if the data is useful, unmoved if it is not. It means sitting in a meeting where someone dismisses your contribution and feeling no sting, not because you have suppressed the emotion, but because your self-assessment is not outsourced to the opinions of others. You know the value of what you offered. If they see it, good. If they do not, that is a failure of their perception, not your worth. And that quiet, unshakable certainty, radiating from you like heat from a stone that has been sitting in the sun all day, is more persuasive than any argument you could make. It means being alone on a Friday night and feeling not loneliness, but luxury. The luxury of your own company. The luxury of a mind that is rich enough, interesting enough, deep enough to sustain itself without external stimulation. Most people run from solitude the way animals run from fire. They fill every moment with noise, music, television, social media, phone calls, texts, anything to avoid the terrifying encounter with their own unadorned thoughts. But you have learned that solitude is not emptiness. Solitude is the workshop where the self is built. And you have been building something extraordinary. Machiavelli spent years in exile after losing his position in Florence. Years in the countryside. Away from the courts and corridors of power he had spent his life navigating. And it was in that exile, in that forced silence that imposed solitude, that he wrote The Prince. The work that would define political strategy for 5 centuries. The work that emerged not from the noise of court life, but from the stillness of a man alone with his thoughts, distilling decades of observation into principles that would outlast empires. His greatest weapon was not proximity to power. It was the silence that came when power was taken from him, and in that silence he found something more dangerous than any title or office: clarity. You are finding that same clarity now. You are beginning to see the world the way a strategist sees a game board, not as a chaotic swirl of events, but as a structured field of patterns, dynamics, and leverage points. You are beginning to see conversations not as exchanges of words, but as exchanges of power. Every sentence a move, every silence a position, every interaction a negotiation for dominance that most people do not even know they are engaged in. And this clarity changes everything. It changes how you make decisions. No longer impulsively, no longer reactively, but with the cold precision of someone who sees 3 moves ahead. It changes how you evaluate people, no longer by what they say, but by what they do, what they avoid, what their silence reveals about the words they choose not to speak. It changes how you carry yourself, no longer as a passenger in your own life, buffeted by circumstance and reactive to the moods of others, but as a pilot, hands steady on the controls, eyes fixed on a horizon that only you can see. Let me tell you about the contrast, because the contrast is where the transformation becomes vivid. Before this video, you were the person who walked into rooms apologetically, not with spoken apologies, with energetic ones. Your body language said sorry. Your eagerness said sorry. Your willingness to accommodate, to defer, to shrink yourself to make others comfortable, all of it said sorry. Sorry for taking up space. Sorry for existing in your fullness. Sorry for the audacity of wanting to be seen as powerful. After this video, after this transformation takes root, you walk into rooms like you own them. Not with aggression, not with bravado, with the quiet, immovable certainty of someone who has been to the bottom of themselves and discovered something unbreakable. Your posture says, I am here. Your silence says, I am watching. Your gaze says, I see everything. And your restraint, your magnificent, calculated restraint, says, I could fill this room with my voice, and I choose not to, because my silence speaks louder than their noise ever will. Before, you filled conversations with unnecessary words because you were afraid of what the silence would reveal about you. After, you let conversations breathe because you understand that what the silence reveals is not weakness, but depth. Not emptiness, but gravity. Not absence, but presence, so concentrated it does not need dilution. Before, you reacted to provocation with emotion, with defensiveness, with anger, with the desperate need to be understood. After, you receive provocation the way the ocean receives a stone, absorbing it completely, rippling briefly, and then returning to a stillness so vast that the stone is forgotten before it reaches the bottom. Before, you chased approval. After, approval chases you, and you greet it when it arrives, not with gratitude, not with relief, but with the composed acknowledgement of someone who expected nothing less. This is not ego. Ego is loud, fragile, and constantly defending itself. This is something deeper. This is the self-possession that comes when you have stopped outsourcing your identity to the opinions of others and started manufacturing it internally from materials that no one else can touch, alter, or take away. And here is the paradox that sits at the heart of everything you have learned. The paradox that Machiavelli circled around his entire life, but never stated directly. The paradox that, once you understand it, makes the entire architecture of silent power click into place. The paradox is this: the less you try to control others, the more they are drawn to you. The less you seek attention, the more attention follows you. The less you need a room's approval, the more that room approves of you. The less you speak, the more your words are remembered. Every instinct in you has been screaming the opposite for your entire life. Society taught you that influence requires effort, that power requires performance, that respect requires constant demonstration, and so you performed. You demonstrated. You exhausted yourself in the pursuit of something that was never available through the channels you were using. The truth is the opposite of everything you were taught. Power flows towards stillness. Attention is drawn to restraint. Respect is earned by the person who does not seek it. And this is not a trick. This is not a manipulation technique. This is a fundamental law of human psychology, observable in every culture, in every era, in every context where humans gather and form hierarchies. The person at the center of the room is never the one trying to be at the center. They are the one who has made the center irrelevant, who has created their own gravitational field so strong that the center relocates to wherever they happen to be standing. That is you now. Not because you learned a set of tactics, but because you have undergone something deeper, a recalibration of your relationship with yourself, with silence, with the world. You have stopped being a person who uses silence as a tool and started being a person for whom silence is a natural expression of depth, composure, and authority. And this identity, this new, forged, crystallized version of yourself, is not something you will need to maintain consciously. It will maintain itself, because it is not a habit you adopted. It is a truth you discovered. And truths, once discovered, cannot be undiscovered. You cannot go back to being the person who filled every silence with noise once you have felt the power that lives in the quiet. You cannot go back to performing once you have experienced the freedom of simply being. Machiavelli ended his life in a kind of resigned wisdom, aware that the world would always be governed by those who understood its hidden mechanics, while the masses would continue to operate on its surface, reacting to symptoms while missing causes, chasing effects while ignoring origins. He wrote for the few who could see deeper, for the few who were willing to face uncomfortable truths about human nature and use those truths not to harm, but to navigate. You are one of those few. Not because you are smarter than others, not because you are better, but because you chose to pay attention. You chose to sit with ideas that make most people uncomfortable. You chose to look at yourself with the ruthless honesty required to see not just who you are, but who you could become. And that choice, that single, quiet, unremarkable choice to keep watching, to keep listening, to keep absorbing, is the most powerful thing you have done today. More powerful than any word you could have spoken. More powerful than any action you could have taken. Because in the economy of transformation, attention is the ultimate currency. And you have invested yours fully. Now there is one final move remaining. One last chamber to enter before this journey is complete. It is the chamber where everything consolidates, where the philosophy, the pillars, the tactics, and the identity merge into a single unshakable way of moving through the world. Where I give you the final key and send you out into a reality that will never look the same again. The silence is almost ready to become your permanent address. Let us finish this. We have arrived. This is the place where everything converges, where every word you have absorbed, every principle you have internalized, every tactic you have stored in the armory of your mind, all of it fuses into something singular. Something that is no longer a collection of techniques, but a way of being. A philosophy made flesh. A strategy made bone. And I want to begin this final chamber with something that might surprise you. After everything I have taught you about silence, about restraint, about the devastating power of what you choose not to say, I want to talk about the one moment when you must speak. The one moment when silence is not strength, but surrender. The one moment when the truly powerful person opens their mouth and lets the room hear what has been building behind the stillness. Because mastery is not permanent silence. Mastery is knowing the exact moment when silence must break. Machiavelli wrote about decisiveness. He despised the indecisive ruler, the prince who waited so long that the moment passed, who held his cards so tightly that the game moved on without him, who mistook paralysis for patience and inaction for strategy. "There is no avoiding war," Machiavelli warned.
It can only be postponed to the advantage of others. The same is true of speech. There are moments when speaking is a necessity, when the room requires your voice, when silence becomes not a fortress, but a tomb. The master of silence knows these moments. They sense them the way a predator senses the exact instant when stillness must explode into motion. And when that moment arrives,
they do not hesitate. They do not stammer. They do not hedge or qualify or soften. They speak with the full, concentrated force of everything they have been holding back. And because they have been holding back, because the room has been waiting, straining, leaning toward them with the accumulated anticipation of all that quiet, their words land like thunder after a long, electric silence. This is the final weapon, not silence alone, but the interplay between silence and speech, the rhythm, the alternation, the music of knowing when to be the pause and when to be the note. Because music without pauses is noise, and pauses without notes are emptiness. The master is the composer who understands both, who crafts a symphony of presence and absence, of restraint and release, of quiet gravity and sudden, surgical precision. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice. Because I do not deal in abstraction. I deal in the concrete, the specific, the deployable. You are in a meeting. A decision needs to be made. The room has been debating for 20 minutes, voices rising and falling, opinions bouncing off walls, arguments colliding and canceling each other out. You have been sitting quietly through all of it. You have been observing. You have been noting who speaks from conviction and who speaks from ego, who has substance behind their position and who is filling air. You have been mapping the room the way a cartographer maps terrain, every ridge, every valley, every hidden passage. And then the moment comes. The energy in the room begins to spiral. The conversation loses direction. People start repeating themselves, recycling arguments, running in circles. The decision drifts further away with every additional word spoken. And you feel it, that precise, crystalline moment when the room needs a compass. You lean forward, just slightly, just enough to shift the energy in your direction. Every eye in the room registers the movement, because you have been so still that any motion from you becomes an event. You wait one more beat. You let the last echoes of the previous speaker's words dissolve into quiet. And then you speak. Not a speech, not a monologue, not a passionate plea or a detailed analysis. 3 sentences, maybe 4, clear, direct, surgical. You name the core issue that everyone has been circling around but no one has articulated. You cut through the fog with a statement so precise that the room goes still. Not because you demanded silence, but because your clarity created it. And then you propose a path forward. Simply, briefly, without justification or apology. And the room follows. Not because you were the loudest, not because you argued the longest, not because you dominated the debate, because you were the person who waited until the moment was ripe and then delivered the words that everyone needed to hear with the economy and precision of someone who values language too much to waste it. This is what separates the master from the amateur. The amateur is either always silent or always speaking. The master moves between the two, with the fluid precision of a blade, moving between shadow and light. They know that silence earns the right to be heard, and being heard replenishes the power of the silence that follows. Now let me consolidate everything you have learned. Let me lay it out before you one final time. Not as a list of techniques, but as a unified philosophy. A way of seeing the world and yourself that will guide every interaction you have from this moment forward. You have learned that silence is not the absence of power. It is the purest expression of power. The person who does not need to speak to be noticed, does not need to explain to be understood, does not need to perform to be respected. That person has transcended the game that everyone else is still desperately playing. You have learned that your body speaks volumes that your mouth never could. That stillness communicates confidence. That controlled movement communicates composure. That a steady gaze communicates authority. All without the vulnerability that words create. Every word you speak is a door you open. Your body can communicate everything you need while keeping every door firmly shut. You have learned that scarcity is the engine of value. In economics, in attention, in human desire. The person who is always present is never missed. The person who is always speaking is never heard. The person who gives everything freely has nothing left that others want. But the person who withholds, strategically, intelligently, never cruelly, becomes the person around whom desire concentrates like light through a lens. You have learned that the pause is the most underestimated weapon in human interaction. That the space between a question and your answer is a territory you control, and that what you do with that territory determines who holds the power in every exchange. A 2-second pause can win a negotiation. A 5-second pause can end a provocation. A 10-second pause can change the trajectory of a relationship. You have learned that true power is not reactive, but generative. It does not respond to the environment. It creates the environment. It does not adjust to the room. It calibrates the room. It does not follow the tempo of others. It establishes a tempo so steady, so deliberate, so irresistibly grounded that others cannot help but synchronize. And you have learned the paradox that makes all of this work. The less you seek, the more you attract. The less you grasp, the more you hold. The less you speak, the more you are heard. The less you need from the world, the more the world gives you. This is not mysticism. This is not wishful thinking. This is the cold, observable mechanics of how human beings evaluate, respect, and follow one another. And you now understand these mechanics at a level that most people never will. Not because the knowledge is hidden, but because most people are too busy making noise to hear the truth that lives in the silence between the words. Machiavelli spent his final years writing letters, observing politics from a distance, and refining the insights that would outlive him by centuries. He knew something that most of his contemporaries did not. That the principles of power do not change. Regimes change, technologies change, languages and cultures and borders change. But the fundamental dynamics of how one human being gains influence over another, these are as constant as gravity, as reliable as the tide, as eternal as the impulse to survive. And the most eternal principle of all, the one that runs through every chapter of The Prince, every page of the discourses, every letter Machiavelli ever wrote, is this: the person who masters themselves masters everything else. Not through force, not through coercion, not through manipulation or deception. Through the sheer, undeniable power of a will that has been tested, a mind that has been sharpened, and a character that has been forged in the furnace of self-knowledge. That is what you have been doing throughout this video. Not learning tricks, not memorizing scripts, forging character, building the internal infrastructure that makes external tactics unnecessary. Because when the infrastructure is strong enough, the tactics emerge naturally, effortlessly, as organic expressions of who you have become, rather than performances you have rehearsed. You are not the same person who pressed play on this video. Something has shifted, something has hardened, something has gone quiet inside you. Not the quiet of defeat, not the quiet of resignation, but the quiet of a blade being drawn from its sheath. That specific, terrifying, beautiful silence that precedes the decisive stroke. You know what to do now. Not because I told you, because something inside you, something that was always there, buried under layers of noise and performance and desperate approval-seeking, has finally been given permission to surface. The strategist in you, the observer, the architect, the sovereign who does not ask for the throne but sits in it as though it were always theirs. And here is my final truth. The truth I have been building toward since the first sentence of this video. The truth that if you understand it completely, will make everything else irrelevant. The greatest form of silence is not what you withhold from others. It is what you withhold from yourself. It is the silence you impose on the voice inside your own head. The voice that doubts, that second-guesses, that replays failures, that whispers inadequacy, that narrates a story of smallness that you have been believing for years. The real war was never in the meeting room. It was never in the negotiation. It was never in the social gathering, or the difficult conversation, or the professional confrontation. The real war has always been internal. The real noise has always been yours. And the real silence, the silence that changes everything, the silence that makes you unbreakable, is the silence you achieve when you finally, permanently, irrevocably stop listening to the voice that tells you that you are not enough. Because you are enough. Not in the shallow, motivational poster sense of the word. In the deep, structural, Machiavellian sense. You are enough because you have the capacity to observe, to learn, to adapt, to endure, to calculate, and to act with precision. You are enough because you sat through this entire video and absorbed principles that most people would dismiss because they demand too much self-confrontation. You are enough because the fact that you are here, the fact that you sought this knowledge, consumed this knowledge, and are now integrating this knowledge, proves that you possess the single most important quality of every person who has ever held real power in this world: the willingness to face the uncomfortable truth. Machiavelli was not popular for telling the truth. He was reviled, exiled, tortured, and ignored. His work was banned by the church and condemned by the moralists of his age. But he wrote it anyway, because he understood that the truth, especially the uncomfortable truth, especially the truth that challenges polite fiction and comfortable illusion, is the only foundation strong enough to build lasting power upon. And you have chosen that foundation. Not the foundation of pretense, not the foundation of performance. The foundation of a person who looked at themselves honestly, acknowledged what was not working, learned what needed to be learned, and committed to becoming something sharper, deeper, and more formidable than what they were before. That commitment is your real weapon, not the silence, not the pause, not the gaze or the posture or the strategic absence. Those are expressions of the weapon. The weapon itself is the decision you made. The decision to stop being what the world made you and start becoming what you choose to be. Everything begins from that decision, and everything unfolds from the silence that follows it. So here is what I ask of you now. If this message reached you, if it did not merely pass through you, but lodged itself somewhere deep, somewhere permanent, somewhere that the noise of the world cannot reach, then I want you to leave a mark below. Not a casual comment, not a reaction, a declaration. Comment the words, "My silence is my answer." That is not just a phrase. It is a pact. A pact between you and the version of yourself that you are becoming. A signal sent into the world that says, "I have heard the truth, and I have chosen to embody it. I will not announce my power. I will not perform my strength. I will let my silence, my composure, my restraint, and my precision speak a language that the weak cannot decode and the wise cannot ignore. My silence is my answer." Write those words and let them become yours. And while you are here, while this energy is still electric in your veins, while this clarity is still sharp in your mind, subscribe to this channel. Not as a passive viewer, not as a casual consumer of content, as a member of a fortress, a place where we do not chase approval, where we do not seek validation, where we gather in the quiet certainty that real power is forged in silence, sharpened in solitude, and deployed with a precision that the noisy world will never understand. This is not entertainment. This is armament. And you have just been armed with something that cannot be taken from you. Something that does not depreciate. Something that grows stronger with every moment you spend in the silence that you have now claimed as your territory. Go now. Walk into your life, your meetings, your relationships, your solitary hours, with the weight of everything you have absorbed sitting firmly in your bones. When you are tempted to speak, remember the economy of words. When you feel the itch of impatience, remember the mastery of the pause. When the noise of the world presses against you, remember the sovereign gaze that sees through the chaos to the pattern beneath. And when someone asks you how you changed, when they notice the new gravity in your presence, the new weight in your silence, the new authority in the rare words you choose to speak, do not explain, do not lecture, do not reveal your sources. Simply look at them with that calm, steady gaze you have been cultivating, and let the silence answer for you. Machiavelli once wrote that fortune favors the bold. But I will tell you something he implied, but never stated. Fortune does not merely favor the bold. Fortune favors the still, the watchful, the deliberate, the one who moves not with the frantic energy of desperation, but with the cold, measured precision of someone who has already won the battle inside themselves and is now simply waiting for the external world to catch up. That is you. Not the person you were, the person you are. Go now. And may your silence be your sharpest blade, your deepest armor, and your most lasting legacy. The room is waiting. Enter it like you own it.